Well, folks, here we are again for the weekly forecast. This last week brought in some cool conditions at the beginning of the weekend, and then of course we've seen that slow buildup of heat, especially across eastern Nebraska, where we moved from the 80s into the 90s. Western Nebraska, of course, flirted with the 90s all week, and we did have quite a few locations that seen several days of low 100-degree readings. Thunderstorm activity, the main brunt of it, of course, with the cold frontal passage that came through late last weekend into early Monday time frame, would dump some respectable precipitation totals across portions of southeastern Nebraska. Then we dealt with these little small pockets of thunderstorm activity throughout central Nebraska and extreme eastern Nebraska during the latter half of this past week. Now, as we go forward in time, of course, we are looking for the heat once again to rebuild into the region, and that looks, according to the models, to hold on for about the next 10 days. Not terrifically hot, but certainly we will be well above normal before we are looking at signs of a very significant cold air mass trying to work its way down from Canada as we get into the time period around the 18th to the 20th of the month. So let's take a look at what we expect over this next 7-day period. And as we go to the upper air models, one thing we can see is that once again we have this ridge built in across the country, and it's going to be very warm today. In fact, we were looking at 90s across the state. It doesn't look like any precipitation. So if you're going to the Husker game this afternoon at 5 o'clock start time, I would expect that temperatures are going to be in the low 90s. And by the time the game's over, we'll probably slip down into the mid 80s. So it's going to be a little hot out there, just like last week. With this earlier start, we're going to have to deal with a couple extra hours of sitting in that very hot, uncovered sun, basically, and sweating to death. But outside of that, most of the moisture will be shifting well to the north of us. And as we go to tomorrow, what we're going to notice is that high pressure system is starting to shrink in regards to this trough trying to move into the northern plains. And that's going to be slow to arrive into our region. So we are expecting fairly dry conditions on Sunday. If we see any thunderstorm activity, it's probably going to be isolated to the panhandle in north central Nebraska. Now, as we get to Monday, we'll start to see that high pressure system starts to push off to the southeast, and here's this front that's going to be moving across the northern plains. So the vast majority of the precipitation on Monday is going to be associated with the Dakotas. Some of that might be able to slip in as we get into Monday evening across the panhandle, and then as we progress through the day on Tuesday, we'll start to see that trough moving its way through here, and that offers our best opportunity for widespread precipitation across the state. And some of that may linger across southeastern Nebraska into Wednesday morning as that trough kind of shifts to our east and starts to funnel the cooler air well to our east. We'll start to see the ridge rebuilding, and the conditions will start to warm up rather dramatically. And in fact, as we get into Thursday, we'll start to see that high pressure system build once again, and that will continue on into the day on Friday, and it'll be early into the next week before we start to see any significant cool weather moving in. So in terms of the precipitation and temperature forecast, there's some isolated thunderstorm activity expected, but for the most part, the main brunt will come in on Tuesday. Temperatures will be very, very warm this weekend, cooling during the middle part of next week, and then a slow gradual warm-up. 8 to 14-day forecast indicates above normal temperatures, once again, for most of the western United States. And as we get from next to the following Tuesday, pretty much dry weather in eastern Nebraska, wet toward western Nebraska.